Şimdi aldım.
Kıymetli sanatçılarımıza teşekkür ediyor ve kendilerine katılım belgelerini vermek üzere Dil ve Tarih Coğrafya Fakültesi Dekanımız Sayın Profesör Doktor Levent Kayıpınar'ı ve çiçeklerini takdim etmek üzere Sayın Tücaum Müdürümüz Sayın Profesör Doktor Necla Türkoğlu'nu sahneye davet etmek istiyorum. Kıymetli sanatçılarımıza tekrardan teşekkür ediyoruz. Şimdi sizleri Türkiye Coğrafyası Araştırma ve Uygulama Merkezimizi tanıtan kısa bir filmimizi izlemeye davet ediyorum. I would like to invite you to watch a short film presenting Research Center of Turkish Geography.
Araştırma ve Uygulama Merkezi Tücaum, ülkemizde coğrafya biliminin gelişmesine sayısız katkısı olan köklü bir kuruluş. Tücaum, Gazi Mustafa Kemal Atatürk'ün adını bizzat verdiği Dil ve Tarih Coğrafya Fakültesi'nde coğrafya bölümü tarafından ulusal stratejik amaçla 1988 yılında Ankara Üniversitesi rektörlüğüne bağlı olarak kurulmuş ve 1990 yılında faaliyete geçmiştir. Türkiye Coğrafyası Araştırma ve Uygulama Merkezi, ülkemizde coğrafi bilimler alanında araştırmalar yapan ve bilimsel faaliyetler düzenleyen bir kuruluştur. Merkezin amaç ve hedefleri arasında Türkiye coğrafyası ile ilgili bilimsel araştırmalar ve incelemeler yapmak, yurt içi ve yurt dışında basılan kitap, dergi, atlas, harita ve benzeri yayınlarda Türk bütünlüğünü ve menfaatlerini zedeleyici ifadelere mani olacak ve Türkiye coğrafyasını tanıtacak bilimsel faaliyetlerde bulunmak, yurt içi ve yurt dışındaki üniversite, enstitü, merkez ve diğer ilgili kurumlarla işbirliği yapmak, Türkiye coğrafyası ile ilgili iç ve dış yayınları toplayarak referans kaynağı olabilecek bir kütüphane, film, fotoğraf, slayt ve benzeri belgelere dayalı arşiv ve dokümantasyon birimi kurmak, Türkiye coğrafyası konusunda araştırmacılar yetiştirilmesine katkıda bulunmak, Türkiye coğrafyası ve Türk dünyası ile ilgili seminer, konferans ve benzeri etkinlikler düzenlemek, Türkiye'yi tanıtıcı bilimsel geziler yapmak, Türkiye coğrafyası konularında araştırma yapmak isteyen bilim insanlarının projelerini desteklemek gibi hedefler yer almaktadır. Bünyesinde barındırdığı Coğrafi Bilimler Dergisi, Uluslararası Coğrafya Sempozyumu, Coğrafi Bilgi Sistemleri Çalıştayı ve Proje Yarışması gibi faaliyetlerle ülkemizdeki coğrafya biliminin temel uygulayıcılarındandır. 1993 yılında merkez çatısında kurulan Türkiye Coğrafyası Araştırma ve Uygulama Merkezi Dergisi, 2003 yılından itibaren Coğrafi Bilimler Dergisi adıyla hakemli olarak yılda 2 sayı halinde yayınlanmaktadır. Coğrafi bilimlerin tüm dallarında çalışmaları yayınlayan dergi, TÜBİTAK Ulat Sosyal Bilimler Veri Tabanı, Social Science Research Network, Sovyet Atıf Dizimi, DOAŞ ve A+ tarafından dizinlenmektedir. Uluslararası Coğrafya Sempozyumu, Tücaum tarafından 1991 yılından itibaren gerek tematik içerikleri, gerekse bütünsel yaklaşımıyla coğrafi disiplinlerle ilgili bilim insanlarını bir araya getirmektedir. 2016 yılından itibaren kapsamını daha da genişleterek uluslararası olarak gerçekleştirilen Coğrafya Sempozyumu, ülkemiz coğrafyasının tüm bileşenleriyle tanınmasını ve tanıtılmasını hedeflemektedir. Coğrafi Bilgi Sistemleri Çalıştayı ise bilişim çağında coğrafya araştırmalarında giderek önemli hale gelen coğrafi bilgi sistemleriyle ilgili bilimsel gelişmeleri, ilgili sorunları ve çözüm önerilerini paylaşmak adına 2014 yılından itibaren sürdürülen bir faaliyettir. Çalıştay, kamu, özel sektör ve akademiyi bir araya getirerek coğrafi bilgi sistemlerinin tüm paydaşlarıyla birlikte incelendiği bir platform oluşturmayı amaçlamaktadır ve bu doğrultuda faaliyetlerini sürdürmektedir. Tücaum, kurulduğu günden bugüne sürdürdüğü tüm faaliyetlerle bilim insanları arasındaki akademik ağı güçlendirmeye ve genç kuşaklara coğrafya bilimini tanıtmayı amaçlayan bir vizyonla hareket etmektedir.
Şimdi Tücaum Müdürümüz Sayın Profesör Doktor Necla Türkoğlu'nu açılış konuşmalarını yapmak üzere sahneye davet ediyorum. I would like to invite Head of Tücaum, Professor Dr. Necla Türkoğlu to the front room for her opening speech.
Sayın Dekanım, kıymetli öğretim elemanlarımız, katılımcılarımız, değerli misafirlerimiz ve sevgili öğrenciler. Ankara Üniversitesi Dil ve Tarih Coğrafya Fakültesi çatısı altında Türkiye Coğrafyası Araştırma ve Uygulama Merkezi tarafından düzenlenen Tücaum 2024 Uluslararası Coğrafya Sempozyumuna hoş geldiniz diyor. Hepinizi saygıyla selamlıyorum.
Dear Dean, dear academic staff and participants, dear guests and dear students, I welcome you to Tücaum 2024 International Geography Symposium, organized by Research Center of Turkish Geography, and I respectfully greet you all.
3 gün sürecek bu etkinlikte sizleri ağırlamaktan büyük mutluluk duyacağımızı ve sempozyuma teşriflerinizin bizleri onurlandırdığını ifade etmek isterim. Sempozyumumuzun detaylarını paylaşmadan önce size merkezimiz hakkında kısaca bilgi vermek istiyorum.
I would like to express that we are happy to host this 3 days event and that we are honored by your presence at the symposium. Before sharing the details of the symposium, I would like to give you brief information about our center.
1988 yılında Ankara Üniversitesi bünyesinde kurulan Türkiye Coğrafyası Araştırma ve Uygulama Merkezi'nin en temel amacı, dünyayı daha iyi kavrayacak bilgiyi üretmek, ülkemiz coğrafyasını tüm yönleriyle araştırmak yanında, yurt içinde ve yurt dışında coğrafyanın her alanında yapılan çalışmaları takip ederek, bilimsel toplantılarda tartışılmasına ve yayınlanmasına ön ayak olmaktır.
The main purpose of Research Center Geography, established in 1988 within Ankara University, is to produce information that will better understand the physical Earth and human world, to research geography of Turkey, all its aspects, and to follow up studies that conducted in Turkey and other countries. And lastly, to initiate their discussion and publication in scientific meetings.
1988 yılında Ankara Üniversitesi bünyesinde kurulan Türkiye Coğrafyası Araştırma ve Uygulama Merkezimiz, kuruluşundan günümüze kadar 8 ulusal, 5 uluslararası olmak üzere toplam 13 sempozyum, 2 coğrafi bilgi sistemleri çalıştayı gerçekleştirir. Ankara Üniversitesi Dil ve Tarih Coğrafya Fakültesi çatısı altında 8-10 Ekim 2024 tarihleri arasında gerçekleştirmekte olduğumuz uluslararası sempozyumumuz, Türk coğrafyasında önemli bir misyonu olan merkezimizin uzun yıllara dayanan özverili çalışmaları sayesinde hayata geçirilmiştir.
Since its establishment, Research Center of Turkish Geography has organized 8 national and 5 international and totally 13 symposiums and 2 geographic information system workshops. This international symposium will organize between 8th and 10th of October 2024 has devoted work of our center an important mission in Turkish geography.
Uluslararası olarak 5.sini gerçekleştirdiğimiz Tücaum 2024 Uluslararası Coğrafya Sempozyumu için çok sayıda başvuru alınmıştır. Sempozyuma Azerbaycan, Kazakistan, Yunanistan, Birleşik Krallık, Belçika, Polonya, Amerika Birleşik Devletleri, İsviçre, İspanya, Çek Cumhuriyeti, Kuzey Kıbrıs Türk Cumhuriyeti, Hollanda ve Almanya'dan olmak üzere 17 farklı ülkeden ve 89 farklı kurumdan 139 bildiri kabul edilmiştir. Kabul edilen bildirilerden 35 oturum oluşturulmuştur. Sempozyumda Polonya'dan Joanna Zamieska, Yunanistan'dan Georgios Mavromatis ve Hollanda'dan Dora Sampio davetli konuşmacı olarak bulunmaktadır. Kendilerine huzurlarınızda teşekkür ediyorum.
As internationally organized fifth time, a large number of applications were received for Tücaum 2024 International Geography Symposium. 139 papers from 17 different countries, including Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Greece, United Kingdom, Belgium, Poland, United States of America, Switzerland, Spain, Czechia, Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, Netherlands, and Germany. And 89 different institutions and universities is accepted to the symposium. And 35 sessions are formed from accepted papers. Joanna Zawieska from Poland, Georgios Mavromatis from Greece, and Grossepaye from the Netherlands are the keynote speakers at the symposium.
Sözlü bildiri ve dinleyici başvuruları dahil sempozyumumuza 385 kişi katılım kaydı yapmıştır. Sempozyumumuzun süreceği 3 gün boyunca aynı anda 4 farklı salonda sunumlar gerçekleşecektir. Türkçe ve İngilizce dillerinde hazırlanan sempozyum programımızda detaylı bilgileri bulabilirsiniz. Sempozyumumuz tamamlandığında bildiri kitabı elektronik olarak yayınlanacak ve web sitemizde erişime açılacaktır.
385 researchers have registered to participate in the symposium, including presentations and audience applications. Presentations will take place in 4 different halls at the same time during the 2 days events of the symposium. You can find detailed information in the symposium schedule that prepared in Turkish and in English. When the symposium is completed, proceedings books will be published electronically and will be accessible on Tücaum website.
Bildiğiniz gibi bir etkinlik desteklendiği ölçüde başarılıdır. Üniversitemizin tüm bileşenleri sempozyumumuza büyük destek verdiler. Kendimizi onların sayesinde çok güçlü hissettik.
As you know, an event is successful as long as it's supported. All institutions of Ankara University provided degree support to Tücaum Symposium, and thanks to them, we felt very strong.
Coğrafyacıların ve coğrafyaya yakından ilgili bilim insanlarının katılımlarıyla gerçekleşen bu sempozyuma gerekli yardım ve desteği sağlayan başta Ankara Üniversitesi Rektörümüz Sayın Profesör Doktor Necdet Ünüvar'a, Fakültemiz Dekanı Sayın Profesör Doktor Levent Kayapınar'a, Sağlık, Kültür ve Spor Daire Başkanı Hakkı Ener Elçi'ye, Rektörlüğümüz ve dekanlığımızın sempozyumumuzda destek olan tüm bilim personellerine şükranlarımızı sunarız.
We wish like to express our gratitude to Rector of Ankara University, Professor Dr. Necdet Ünüvar, the Dean of the Faculty, Professor Dr. Levent Kayapınar, the Head of Department of Health, Culture and Support or SKS, Hakkı Ener Elçi, and the staffs from the Rectorate and the Dean's Office, who provided support to the symposium, which is held with the participants of geographers and scientists closely related to geography.
Sempozyumumuza gelerek bizleri onurlandıran, ilgi ve uzmanlık alanlarına göre bildiri hazırlayarak bu kongrede sunan değerli katılımcılara, dinleyicilere, kongre düzenleme ve yürütme kurulunun değerli üyelerine, bildirileri inceleyen hakemlere, yürütme kurulunun çalışmalarına yardımcı olan sevgili öğrencilerimize, oturumları yönetecek sayın oturum başkanlarına gönülden teşekkür ederim.
I sincerely thank to all esteemed participants and audiences who honor us by attending the symposium and preparing and presenting the papers relating to their areas of expertise, and the valuable members of the organizing committee, and the reviewers who evaluate the papers, the dear students who assist the work of the organizing committee, and the esteemed session chairs who will lead and moderate the sessions.
Sözlerime son verirken başarılı ve verimli bir sempozyum gerçekleşmesini temenni ediyorum. Bu buluşmanın yeni akademik işbirliklerinin gelişmesine, zemin hazırlamasına, yeni araştırma fikirlerinin ortaya çıkmasına ve hayata geçmesine vesile olmasını diliyor. Tücaum'un 2026 yılı Ekim ayında düzenlenecek uluslararası sempozyumunda tekrar birlikte olmak dileğiyle hepinizi saygıyla selamlıyorum.
As I conclude my speech, I wish for a successful and fruitful symposium. I hope this gathering will pave the way for the development of deep academic collaborations, the emergence of research ideas, and their implementation. I respectfully greet you all, hoping we together again at Tücaum International Symposium to be held in October 2026. Tücaum Müdürümüz Profesör Doktor Necla Türkoğlu'na konuşmaları için teşekkür ediyoruz. Şimdi Dil ve Tarih Coğrafya Fakültesi Dekanı Sayın Profesör Doktor Levent Kayapınar'ı konuşmaları için kürsüye davet ediyorum. Now I would like to invite Dean of Faculty of Language, History, Geography, Profesör Doktor Levent Kayapınar to the rostrum for his speech.
Bir önceki Dekanımız Sayın İhsan Çiçek, kıymetli bilim insanları, değerli katılımcılar ve sevgili öğrenciler. Ankara Üniversitesi Türkiye Coğrafyası Araştırma ve Uygulama Merkezi'nin düzenlediği Tücaum 2024 Uluslararası Coğrafya Sempozyumuna hoş geldiniz. Yüce Atatürk'ün kurduğu bu salon, bu fakülte 1941 yılında düzenlenen 1. Türk Coğrafya Kongresi'nden beri bu tür gelenekleri yapmaya alışkın bir salon. Fakat bu geleneğimiz son zamanlarda 1988 yılında kurulan Türkiye Coğrafyası Araştırma ve Uygulama Merkezimizin etkinliğinde daha da bir canlılık kazandı. Yaklaşık 33 yıldır, 1991 yılından itibaren bu etkinlikler devam ediyor. Tabii bu etkinliklerin devam etmesinde bir önceki dekanım Sayın İhsan Çiçek'in, Necla Türkoğlu'nun, şu anda bölüm başkanımız olan Uğur Doğan'ın ve dekan yardımcımız olan Rüya Bayar hocamızın çok büyük katkıları var. Ben hem onlara hem coğrafya bölümündeki bütün hocalarımıza ve sempozyuma katılan bütün değerli, kıymetli bilim insanlarınıza huzurlarınızda teşekkür ediyorum. Bu sempozyumun hayırlı ve başarılı olmasını diliyorum. Saygılar sunuyorum.
Dekanımız Sayın Profesör Doktor Levent Kayapınar'a konuşmalarından ötürü teşekkür ediyoruz. We thank the Dean of Faculty, Professor Dr. Levent Kayapınar for his speech. Şimdi sempozyumumuza sunumlarıyla katkı sağlayan kıymetli davetli konuşmacılarımızı sunumlarını yapmak üzere kürsüye davet etmek istiyorum. I would like to invite the esteemed keynote speakers who contribute to the symposium with their presentation to the rostrum to present their presentation. İlk olarak Yunanistan'daki Harakopia Üniversitesi'nden Sayın Doçent Doktor Yorgos Mavromatis'i Atina'daki GİK ekonomisinde çalışan göçmenler, entegrasyon sürecine giden bir yol olarak yemek dağıtım hizmetleri başlıklı sunumunu yapmak üzere kürsüye davet ediyorum. I would like to invite Associate Professor Yorgos Mavromatis to the rostrum to present his presentation, Migrants Workings in the Gig Economy of Athens, Food Delivery Services as a Pathway to Integration.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much for coming to Ankara. I have been to Istanbul many times, and I've been to Ankara, and I always find, the similarities between Greek cities and Turkish cities. When I was invited, I was told that it would be good to present something, your current research, and I thought that maybe I should present something that is very at the early stages, and in a way it can be something like a brainstorming, because the actual research is just starting, and this is a project from the National Center of Social Research, and basically we examine is close to cultural geography, is close to urban geography, is close to social geography, is close to political geography. Supposedly I'm associate professor of political geography, but basically what I do urban geography, I do political geography, I do social geography, I do a number of things. So, within human geography, you have all this kind of interdisciplinarity, But even more interesting, geography and human geography is also kind of in a dialogue with other disciplines. So, I would say geography from the 1990s onwards has been one of the most interdisciplinary fields in social sciences. And we have a lot of philosophy in there, and have a lot of other kind of disciplines getting into, and it's a kind of a creative dialogue. So, today I will speak as a human geographer, and today, please allow me to just put a little bit of philosophy in it, and maybe a little bit of critical social theory, so to spice up things a little bit more. Most of my research through the years has been focused on, it's somewhere between migration studies and urban studies. So most of my research, it's not all of my research, because research projects takes you to different directions. But most of my research, or at least what I like to do the most, has to do with migration in cities. It can be peripheral sites outside of cities, it can be refugee camps, but most of my research has to do with migration studies and urban studies. Okay, it's urban geography, it's political geography, it's social geography, but if we see it outside of the strict lens of geography, it's something like migration studies and urban studies, or migration ethnic studies, the studies of ethnicity and urban studies. And a lot of work has been done on this kind of intersection of migration studies and urban studies, but not so much, as a matter of fact. Not so much, Migration studies go one way, urban studies go another way. At some point they meet, but the intersection is not so pronounced. And I think, the people that they did exactly that, and right now I start talking about cities, the people that did that for the very first time, I think it was the Chicago School of Ethnography. It was the Chicago Sociology School of the University of Chicago. Early 20th century, more or less the time that this building, or a little bit earlier that this building was built, there was this school in Chicago that they examined the city of Chicago, that back then had the biggest migration flows from any other American city, but they examined the city, but what they were interested in ethnicity and migration and culture and a number of things. And I think, these are the founders of this kind of mingling together of migration studies, what we would call right now migration studies. Before we might have called it kind of ethnicity studies and urban studies. And to be honest, I think it's a very important school. It has always been, at least, to my humble understanding, a very important aspect. And I think their ideas are still contemporary. Maybe what is missing from their ideas is their political aspect, wherever politics mean to different people. But I try to bring another school in to kind of, to move on, to kind of correct a little bit the situation. So, this is what I was talking about. I was talking about, migration in the city, or ethnicity in the city, or ethnic studies in the city. And this is, I think, this is what I have been mostly interested for the last 20 years. I do other things, but I think this is what I have been mostly interested in. Whenever I go to a city, this is the first thing I would do. And there have been many books, important books being written, and this is kind of migrants and city making. And here we have a number of questions, what kind of migration urban studies might mean. And it's, what is the role of migration in the city? And a very important aspect, I think, this kind of conversation is like, what's happening with the migrants in the city? What's happening with these kind of migrants in the city? Do they integrate in the city? So we have this another important concept of migration studies, the concept of migrant integration. And what does migrant integration mean? So, you know, migrant integration in relation to what? In relation to the economy, in relation to society, in relation to culture. So we have this kind of buzzword that we have to define. What does it mean, migrant integration? What do we expect from the migrants when we say, you know, they have to integrate in a city, in a country, I don't know what. So, you know, this concept of integration, I think it's a very important concept, and I'm going to use it later. So that's why I put more emphasis on it. And then, you know, we have other kind of questions, what a kind of an ethnically diverse city looks like, and can migrants belong to the city? Can migrants more easily belong to a city than a nation? What policy can do for migrants, and what policy can do for migrant integration? And are cities kind of accommodating place for migrants? Or, you know, cities are the places of ethnic strife and ethnic competition. So, you know, I have so many questions over there that migration and urban studies, this kind of intersection between migration and urban studies, attempts to give answers. And these are just some questions, you know, there are many more questions about that. As you know, this world is getting more and more urbanized. More and more people are living in cities and towns, either in the global north or the global south. So we have a kind of a huge urbanization taking place. It has been taking place, but it increases, and climate change plays a role in that. So, you know, we have this kind of huge urbanization. And at the same time, we have more and more cities around the world that the foreign-born population is increasing. And the foreign-born population, not the second generation, not people of migrant descent, foreign-born population. So, you know, you see cities, I don't know, you know, Stockholm, Amsterdam, London, Paris, but a number of cities, you know, Istanbul, Athens, that they have bigger and bigger migrant populations. And of course, you know, something that we should never forget is that you have a backlash to this thing. Of course, there's a political backlash to migration. And especially in Europe right now, there is a huge political backlash in relation to migration. So I'm not just saying that things are without problems or things are without antagonisms. There's an antagonism in relation to all these things. And of course, you know, we have many representations of cities and migration, and these are some films from New York. Probably nobody sees films anymore. You know, video games are more important than films. So, you know, if with young students, you can relate more by just giving references to video games than giving references to films from the 90s. So this is New York. Some films in London, you know, like from the 1990s and the 2000s. And also, very interestingly, some films about Hamburg and Istanbul, and they talk, you know, this relationship, and they bring to the fore, you know, this film of Fatih Akin, especially, you know, The Edge of Heaven, just brings to the fore this idea of transnationalism, that is also a very kind of geographical concept. And what is transnationalism? Transnationalism, in a way, is this concept that you can belong to more than one place, that you have relations to more than one place, that you live your life to more than one place. And I don't know if you have seen the film, but I think it's one of the best representations of what this academic concept of transnationalism might mean in everyday life. So, you know, we have all this kind of migration in cities. Has not been also an academic topic of research. It has been also kind of subject of film representation. And right now, you know, this was more like an introduction. I tried to introduce you in this kind of idea of migration in cities. And right now, you know, I think I'm moving into the next part of my presentation. But I try to be a little bit more academic, and I try to be probably putting forward, you know, the foundations of this kind of study of migration in the city. And at least, in my understanding, or at least in my selection, these are some important stages. And I think, the first book of urban geography, or the first book of social and political geography, is Engels, is the condition of the working class in Manchester. Engels is a rich German industrialist that goes to Manchester and does a kind of an ethnography of the condition of the working class in Manchester. And this is the first book that is written on kind of an ethnography of the working class, a kind of an urban geography. I mean, in my understanding, I don't think there is a book before that, but maybe I'm wrong. But it's a very important book and sets, some foundations there that we examine cities, and we examine cities from an urban geography or a social geography perspective. And then, of course, another very important stage, at least in my understanding, is the Chicago School of Ethnographers. This school of ethnography, basically this school of sociology that developed, as we said before, in Chicago in the beginning of the 20th century. And they talked about many things. I think one of the most important things they talked about, this concept of ethnic segregation. Ethnic segregation, that in cities, for this idea that in cities, these diverse populations do not share common spaces. They live apart. I think this is one of the very important ideas. And then, another very important idea that they brought to the table, but again, I don't think somebody else has examined it empirically, has been the idea of integration. How do migrants integrate into the city? And this is, I don't know, human geographers, urban geographers know what I'm talking about. This is the zone model of Burgess, that he says that we have the inner city zones of transition that the migrants concentrate, and these are the poorest places of the city with the worst kind of housing. And the concept of integration, migrants integrate when they leave these places of arrival and they start moving to the suburbs. So, the Chicago School of Ethnographers bring into the idea two very important notions. The notion of ethnic segregation, different populations, different neighborhoods, but also the notion of integration, that at some point you have a mingling, at some point this kind of strict ethnic segregation breaks down, at least for the migrants that they have been around for a while in the city. So, if you want to keep in mind this idea of integration, that's what I want to say. And they did a lot of work. There were ethnographers. What does ethnography mean? Ethnography means participant observation. You participate, you observe, you see the city, you see how its population live. It's a kind of an anthropological technique. It's an anthropological method. So you observe the city. It's not about numbers. It's not quantitative, it's qualitative. So in a way, they bring qualitative research into social sciences. That's what they do. Again, I cannot think of who first wrote qualitative research in social science. I think they did. And they wrote, this kind of studies about the ghetto, about the hobo, and they examine all these different kinds of aspects. And then, another school I want to talk about, and I want to talk about this school that is not a geography school, it's a philosophical school. And the reason I want to talk about this school is because I think they also bring to the fore something very important. And I think, this is important still now. And I think, the importance is this idea of critique. And I don't say it in a neo-Marxist way. I don't use, a Frankfurt School in a neo-Marxist way. I use it as an idea of a critique, this idea of critical social theory, this idea that we see reality, we see the economy, we see the society, we see culture, and we make some judgments. It's a very Hegelian idea. It goes back to Hegel. It goes back to Hegel and this kind of idea of false consciousness, that we have to have a critical lens towards reality. So, you know, what comes with the Frankfurt School, I think it's this kind of critical perspective, the critical perspective on things. And I think it's an important perspective. And the older I get, I was very kind of romantic, you know, when I was a student, then I became more cynical, and I think this idea of critique starts to emerge again in my mind. And one of the big ideas, I mean, you know, these people wrote about everything. I mean, you know, they were like the top intellectuals of their era, you know. And very, very interesting, you know, the Goethe University, you know, the Frankfurt Goethe University, has exactly the same architectural style as this building. And opposite, you know, the economic, the Center of Economic Research, again, the same kind of German Bauhaus style. So, you know, they talked about a lot of things. I think two ideas I want to keep, I want to bring to the fore, is the idea of Adorno, the idea of negative dialectics. Things can go wrong. You know, have this concept of dialectics that comes from Plato, probably. You know, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and everything is positive. And then we have Hegel, who says, you know, yes, you know, the human spirit becomes realized in history in a positive manner, and you know, this idea of freedom becomes materialized. But Adorno says, no, also negative. Things can go wrong. You have a kind of different idea of history. And another, of course, very important idea, the Frankfurt School, and probably the idea of the Frankfurt School that they became famous for, is the idea of the culture industries. The idea that enlightenment led to capitalism in their era, to Fordist capitalism, to organized capitalism. And within the spectrum of organized capitalism, you had the media that came out, television and radio, and produced a kind of a mass society in order to consume. And their idea is this idea of cultural industries as in a way reproducing the economic system, the cultural industries as basically pacifying the brains. So you get stuck in this economic system, you know. The culture and the cultural industries work in a kind of a hegemonic way to reproduce the economic system. And they talk about the cultural industries that they cannot before. So keep that for later. And then, you know, another important idea that comes from the Frankfurt School, although this is not the core of the Frankfurt School, is a little bit further. This is Walter Benjamin. He's a literary critic, but, you know, very important one. Core of people that they're full-time employees. So they have social security rights. And they have a kind of a minimum wage that on top of that they take commissions. So eFood has a kind of a double system, you know, some steady employment, a steady workforce, and then, you know, the freelancers. And it's not so much dominated by migrants. If people working for it, but you also have a lot of money. In India, you have internal migration, you don't have international migration. While up to now, we're talking about international migration. So you have internal migration, and you have many articles about China, about India, and this kind of logistics and food delivery services. And this kind of interesting, because in a way, you know, this is the beginning of global urban studies. In a way. You know what I mean? Like, urban studies has been a North American, then European thing, and then, you know, other followed. Right now, you know, the other parts of the world become part of the urban studies, and in a way, that creates a kind of a global urban studies. That again, this is a kind of a new phenomenon. This is some papers, you know, the papers are hundreds of them. So what right now, we try to explore, why we will try to do this research. And this is a kind of a qualitative research. I think we're going to have at least 4 researchers, and we'll try to do an ethnography. And we will try to speak and do participant observation with people that they work in food delivery services, either migrant or either native Greeks. We're not excluding any category. But the focus is, of course, on the migrants. And I think, what we will try to explore is kind of this idea of integration. As I told you before, I've been talking about this idea of migrant integration from the very beginning of this presentation. And so what we try to bring to the fore is the idea of integration. There are a few papers written on the topic. It's not like we thought about that and has never been thought before. There's some papers there already. But what we will try to do is to see, this concept of integration from a critical lens. Meaning, do these migrant workers in the food delivery services really integrate through this profession? How do they integrate? Culturally, economically, and socially? Is it really a form of integration, or is it kind of a continuation, probably, of a non-integration that has been taking place before? What are their jobs before? Before they moved massively into this kind of food delivery services, what were their jobs? How do they use the app? In which language they use the app? What is the role of technology in their professional life, but also what is the role of technology in their personal lives? You know what I mean? The mobile is the algorithm where you get, the delivery, but at the same time, the mobile through social media, it's your connection with back home, with the connection with your diaspora. You know what I mean? So it's kind of a double role. Technology plays a double role in these people's lives. So we want to see all these kinds of research questions. I don't know, how successful we will be, but this is the kind of idea that we have. And as I told you before, what we probably want to do, we want to take this kind of idea of integration and see it from a critical perspective. As we said, I think the biggest contribution of the Frankfurt School in social sciences was this idea of critical social thinking. We want to see, this employment also from a kind of a critical lens. And in a way, maybe we have a kind of a dialectical image over there. And this is something very broad, abstract, and maybe it doesn't make sense. But, the Frankfurt School was talking in the midst of Fordism and was talking about, a mass society, mass production, mass consumption, a mass society based on Fordism. So this is one aspect of the picture. The other aspect of the picture, this idea of dialectical image of Benjamin, is right now, we're in this idea of platform capitalism, the gig economy, the platform capitalism. And in the platform capitalism, you have social media, you have apps, you have platforms, you have everything. And in a way, they produce culture. These things produce culture, and these things also produce value. Then they have an economic aspect and a cultural aspect. Think about, the very notion of the influencer. The influencer produces economic value, but at the same time produces cultural. So this idea of cultural industries that the Frankfurt School used 100 years ago, or 90 years ago, we can see this idea of cultural industries within this kind of digital capitalism, within this kind of platform economy, and kind of try to understand that this kind of platform capitalism, what does it do? What does it do? And do migrants really integrate by doing it? they don't integrate. And by just doing, and of course, you know, here with integration, we have many stories and many theories and everything. And I want to bring to the fore this idea of segmented assimilation or segmented integration. And basically that means that migrants cannot really integrate into the mainstream society because this idea of mainstream society does not exist anymore in any society. You know, in Turkish society, in Greek society, in UK society, in American society, the societies are not one thing anymore. When the Frankfurt School was talking, they were talking about, you know, the mass society. But you know, 100 years from now, there's not a mass society. Everything is segmented. I mean, it's just like layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of social stratification. So the kind of idea is, if we take this idea of segmented assimilation, where do migrants integrate? Which part of society and economy do they integrate? Do they integrate in the very lower strata of society? You know what I mean? Do they integrate in the most disadvantaged economically and socially disadvantaged part of society? And that brings also, I take, you know, this idea of critical social theory a step further. What about the native workers? We have been doing interviews with the native workers in the gig economy. And we hear things that are not nice. You know, minimum wages, no social security, insecurity, inflation, housing prices, not making ends meet, basically. So, you know, we talk about migrants' integration in the gig economy, but maybe, you know, we should see it more broadly. And we should see it as, even for native Greek self-employed people, that they do this job full-time. Is there a need for their integration too? Do they need also to integrate a little bit higher, you know, in the Greek society or in the Athenian economy? So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Is there any presenter who could provide microphone?
Yeah, just. Can you hear me? Yes, I'm Kasper from University. Jonas, thank you very much for this presentation. I am very happy to have the chance to listen to this general evaluation, but also trying to locate the Greek case within this bigger neoliberal trap we are in, because it's beyond the natives or the migrants. Yes, what does this gig economy that does for integration of the immigrants? So I would like to turn back to the very first question: what do we mean by integration? Of course, we are not in the paradigm of this Frankfurt School. Nothing is stable now. There's no mass society. There's no mass economy. That's true. But still, as human beings, we need a kind of a stability. This is the danger we are now facing in the global scale. The lack of stability. This is the main question. The instability in the economy, instability in society, instability in cultural continuity. And I think basically migration is a self-challenge, and we need a new identity based on place. So I would like to repeat the question: what do we mean really by the integration of migrants to the city? And then what would be the outcome of the integration to the city? Because the basic geographical concept here we must employ now is, I think, scale. When people say, I would like to migrate, we don't say, I would like to migrate to Paris or I would like to migrate to the European Union. We are still having the concept of countries and states. We say, I'm migrating to Greece or I'm migrating to Germany. So within this very well criticized example, what is the place of nation states, which seems old-fashioned now, but we still need that. You know, this is my personal opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, very good questions, and I don't think I have the answers. You know, integration. You know, if you take migration studies, half of migration studies are integration studies. So integration might mean very different things. I think, you know, maybe the most interesting part of this research would be maybe to understand what integration might mean in this very tiny, specific labor set. If it's integration or if it's not integration. So I think the only way to understand integration is to be extremely specific. So I think that's what we try to do in this particular research. Integration, generally speaking, is an extremely broad term. It cannot be defined only on a normative level. On a normative level, it cannot be defined, but not it can be defined empirically. Or empirically can be defined too, or substantially. About stability and instability, yeah, you know, there's a lot of instability, as you said, a lot of economic, social, and political instability. At the same time, there's a lot of stability too. We should not forget that. As we have Fordism and post-Fordism and platform capitalism, all these things coexist. So we have a lot of stability and a lot of instability. And I see a lot of stability here too. And I see a lot of stability in Athens too. And I see a lot of instability too. So I think both of these things exist. And your last question, if I can answer, because I don't give definite answers for any of the questions. We integrate, you know, we have the idea of the state, but we have the city, and we have this idea of local integration. And I agree with you both with what you said. I think states are still important, because, you know, states are states, you know, they go back to the 16th century in Europe. I wanted to come here, and I had to have a passport, and I had to pass through it. You know, they're there, and, you know, critical migration scholarship that tries to get rid of them. Okay, it cannot happen. You know, so you go into this kind of not pragmatism. About cities, I think cities have always been important for migrants, and they have been more accommodating places than the other places. But I think lately you start having, at least in Europe, and at least, you know, the debate right now in Europe about migration and integration is that you have this kind of spillover effect from the cities to smaller towns, medium towns, and rural areas. So, you know, the discussion also kind of changes. Smaller communities, closer communities, we don't have the anonymity. You know, the city has this kind of anonymity. It doesn't have this kind of close-knit community that can be more accommodating for migrants. But, I don't have the answers. I wish I had the answers.
They were really good answers. Of course, there's no certain answers, but not very last and short. I'd like to share one opinion of mine about the integration. When we say integration is a self-challenge, our identities are challenged. For example, a Syrian person refused to Turkey. He or she doesn't come to here to become Turkish. He's here to survive, or a Turkish person migrates to Germany, not to become a German. He or she goes there to make money, you know. So our identities, ethnic identities, religious identities, sexual identities, they are all challenged in the new social settings, which we call, you know, the receiving societies. Within receiving societies, what we need, and as social scientists, what we should work on, is that how can we develop a common identity which doesn't threaten the already existing identities of both natives, because natives are also challenged by newcomers. So it's not a one-sided social phenomenon, as we all know. So place identity here is very important. You gave a lot of examples about some movies and documentaries, and I would like to give another one. I watched a documentary about the disappearing cosmopolitan character of the city of Izmir during the 20th century. And I was one participant, I think a Greek historian, who she never lived in Izmir, but her ancestors are from Izmir. She still says that being from Izmir is a feeling, and whenever she lives in United Kingdom, she lives in Greece or wherever, and she has never lived in Izmir, but she still says that she is from Izmir. So the city identity is a kind of a feeling actually, but don't criticize me at first place because this feeling is too subjective thing. But here, I think integration is also a kind of a identity feeling that doesn't threaten others. For example, when in our conversation previously, I thought that my ancestors are from Italy. So this is still there, somehow it's a place identity. And so I think place identity in the scale of cities could combine different social groups. Pakistani can be from someone from Athens, but it's a self-identification and it needs time, which we don't have in this neoliberal paradigm. We need time. Yeah.
Very
We don't have
very
it.
interesting.
Thank you for nice, interesting speech or presentation. I'm sorry about that if I missed, because I didn't quite catch about the administrative geography. So I am from public administration science, as you see. So there is very strong link between the public policies and the geography, Also, Turkey has no public policy on mountains area. Even 74% has mountains area. So what do you think about the immigration, about this mountains area, not only Turkey, but the other mountains area, immigration and the sea level getting higher and higher? What is your idea or scenario for this?
So rising sea levels
And mountains
migration.
area. So a new destination, I'm thinking like that. The mountains area is a new destination for the immigration. What do you think about this? On the other things, let me I am told about this. You didn't mention about transdisciplinary. Yeah, it is also important for the geographic activities. I have good research, someone told us, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and the open policies. My name is Zerrin Toprak. Then you can find from internet. It is a nice, because so many people misuse and conflict each other. There is this kind of verse in each other. There's no certain idea, I believe. So I suggest transdisciplinary is important as well. Thank you.
Very, very good point. Yeah, transdisciplinarity. Yeah, probably the way I use interdisciplinarity includes this idea of transdisciplinarity. So I see things as getting inside each other. So probably I kind of use it in this
Because
kind
their
of sense.
person is important nowadays, so it is. So what do you think about the sea level, mountains area? Is a new destination? What do you think it is? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know, the things I know is about
Perhaps
cities.
Chinese and India, I think, working for this case.
Yeah. I don't really know, I don't really know, sorry. Definitely, climate change and all these things that have been taking place in relation to the environment, the degradation of the environment, create new migration pressures. And these migration pressures, at some point, they will get materialized, but at the same time, we should not forget that also, the migration policies are changing. So we have migration pressures, but we have changing migration policies, and I don't know about the future. I just don't know.
Thanks so much for your very interesting and fascinating talk. I'm just wondering, as you said that
digital capitalism or platform capitalism has changed the concept of labor, which has become quite fragmented, precarious, as well as decentralized and individualized. I was just wondering whether you have looked at the space that gave migrants to establish social identity, social mobilization, and etc. in your research. If we think about Greece, which has a long history of mobilization, protest, and etc., how do migrants perceive that, or how migrants have been affected by this tradition, and how they establish their social identity, their sense of belonging towards their work through this, you know, let's say, space which has such tradition. Recently, I have reviewed a book which is called, which is written by Donatella Della Porta. Maybe you're already aware of that book, Labor Conflict in Digital Era. She's basically looking at northern countries rather than south countries. But I was just wondering, it would be quite interesting to look at from Greece perspective and to kind of understand, social identity through their work, even though it is quite individualized, but I still believe that in this capital platform capitalism, still there is a space for any workers to have social consciousness, class consciousness, and social identity. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Very interesting question. As a matter of fact, the September, you have this kind of mobilizations in Athens by Volt employees, and I think they have met 3 times, and they go strikes, and the idea is to go strike, so the algorithm to stop, and for a few minutes the algorithm stops, but just for a few minutes, and then they take the bikes and they go through Athens, and they just hoot and they just try, to create a kind of presence, to their mobilization. Because basically what they want higher, because the price per delivery has decreased substantially during the last year, from 2.25 to 1.6 euros. So their wage is going down because the algorithm just decreases, the price of delivery. And that has created these mobilizations. And in these mobilizations, they're mostly the self-employed people. And most of the self-employed people are Greeks, because they have to pay their social insurance and everything, and they have to be in more stable lives. Their lives are totally unstable, but maybe they're more stable than other kinds of migrants. And they're also kind of migrants, but not Pakistani migrants, but because Pakistani involved is a very big section of the labor force. But there are the kind of ethnicities. But as I told you before, Volt has this kind of pyramids that you have one manager. It's a kind of a subcontracting. Volt subcontracts these managers, and they have their own drivers. They might have like a few hundred each, and in a way they manage them more strictly. So you didn't have a big representation of Pakistanis in this kind of mobilizations because their management is stricter through this kind of subcontracting managers than the rest. So I don't know if that answers your questions, but in Greece we have a history of mobilizations. At the same time, there are structural conditions that allow you or don't allow you to mobilize or not. That's a very good question. Thank you.
But I believe that people always find ways to or strategies to kind of overcome the situation. They use digital spaces, even though it is prohibited in the actual physical spaces. Let's say squares in Greece, in Athens, which is quite famous. It is history. They could still mobilize in WhatsApp groups or other applications or whatever.
Yeah.
Let's call virtual spaces.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Very interesting. Maybe it should be one of the things that we should just pay attention to while we're doing our research. Maybe it can be one of the topics we can think about it, but I don't have an answer. That's an interesting idea. Thank you.
So is there any other question? Başka sorusu olan var mı? Tamamdır. Şimdi dekan yardımcımız Sayın Profesör Doçent Doktor Rüya Bayar ve Tücaum Müdürümüz Sayın Profesör Doktor Necla Türkoğlu'nu sahneye davet etmek istiyorum. Doçent Doktor Yorgo Özmavropat size sunumları için tekrardan teşekkür ediyoruz. Şimdi sosyoekolojik sistemler olarak dağ nehirleri, yönetim ve restorasyona ilişkin değişim, adaptasyon ve zorluklar başlıklı sunumunu yapmak üzere Bologna Pedagoji Üniversitesi'nden Doçent Doktor Joanna Javieska'yı kürsüye davet ediyorum. I would like to invite Associate Professor Joanna Javieska to the rostrum to present her presentation, Mountain Rivers as Socio-Ecological Systems, Change, Adaptation, and Challenges for Management and Restoration.
Good morning, everyone, dear hosts and colleagues. I'm very happy to be here and thank you again for the invitation. As British comics say, down for something completely different. But I'm very glad for the previous presentation and also the questions because they did, not on purpose, but they did give some background to things I wanted to talk about. As you can see, I'm from the Institute of Biology and Neurosciences, so my perspective is a physical geographer. I am a fluvial geomorphologist, and I've spent, I think, well, I already have glasses, so about 25 years in a very river you can see here. And I would like to talk about mountain rivers, socio-ecological systems, but not diving into theory. I think a lot of us, I could see people shift uncomfortably in their chairs already at critical theory. So I probably could find out some physical geographers here. Well, I'm from Krakow. Some of you have been to Krakow, and some of the students from Ankara are already professors. And they came to Poland as Erasmus students. I'm really glad to and just with my university, it changed its name, so it used to be pedagogical, that's the different name. All right, so why do you want to talk about socio-ecological systems when we talk about rivers? And I found this very interesting quote. It's a little bit out of context, but I really thought it's very fitting that without common framework to organize findings, isolated knowledge does not accumulate. And ecological and social sciences, they did develop slightly independently and they do not combine easily. And I will talk a lot about our common language or the lack of it. So maybe you have seen that geography in many universities has split a little bit. It is a holistic, very multidisciplinary subject, but with advances in technology, especially remote data acquisition and analysis of the data, we have further specialization. A lot of us physical geographers are really focused on our small little area. And for all the colleagues who wear glasses, like I do, and and older, this is maybe coming back, the whole circle, coming back to the geography as a whole. But what I would like to talk about and inspire you to think about is why we can and why we should embrace a more holistic view through interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches in relation to rivers and especially mountain rivers. That's my entire work actually. So mountains are special, you know that they are special. They are very complex, but mountains also means isolation, marginalization, and a lot of hazards related to mountain areas. And rivers are the mountain's nervous system. In a natural circumstance, they will reflect everything that's happening and what the background is in the catchment. But this nervous system is pulsating, is dynamic. And in the mountains where we have people, we sometimes have an idea that mountains are so pristine, nobody lives there, maybe somewhere in the top of Himalayas, but still, there are lots of people there. And when we have that pulsating nervous system of the rivers that adapts and changes to the circumstances, to the changing environmental conditions or human pressures, we also have people who have to adapt. And in the mountains, by definition, we have very little wiggle room for that. That's just physically, we have very little space. So that nervous system, when it's pulsating, it will send copious amounts of water, of sediment, of everything, organic matter, downstream. It will not respect borders, it will not respect administrative borders at all. So, as we have a lot of very positive elements related to mountain rivers and ecosystem services that they provide us, they also can bring hazard out of the mountains. So we have a lot of human pressures on the mountains. If you look just briefly, we modified the fluxes of natural river material. We added new substances and new materials. I'll talk about it later. We have changed the morphology, the planforms of rivers tremendously, and that characteristics that affect the habitats as well. We changed by damming rivers, we changed hydrological regime and thermal regime as well. It has tremendous consequences. Water quality is another issue. Maybe we created situations where exotic species can find a better home there now, and we introduced them. And what we also have is a cascade of unwanted and unexpected side effects of human interventions. But mountain rivers have been notoriously causing problems. So a lot of those interventions were not in bad faith. That were the technology, the knowledge of the time when we tried to cope with the situation. So that's an example from Polish mountains about some of those photographs over 100 years ago. And the river on the right side is in the 1950s. So I will also talk about how quickly those pressures affected the rivers. So we have tremendous sediment supply from deforested slopes. Everything was used for agriculture, whatever. It's a very poor region, and people just used what they could. It was the end of the ice age. It was cold, it was wet. Basically, it's not where you would like to have agriculture, but we did. And this is something you see in the lower picture. And we had frequent floods. They were huge, and there were many, and they were very, very threatening to the mountain communities. By the way, this is why we have such a big Polish mountain community in Chicago. Lots of people immigrated at that time. It's a mystery why mountain people live in Chicago, but they do. All right, so climate. And so a lot of problems. And to counteract those problems, these are pictures from the floods in 1934. One of the biggest that we had in the northern part of the Carpathians in the last couple of 100 years. So There are many, many reasons, but where we intervened, but we tried to make the mountain areas more habitable for people who live there. But the problem with the rivers is, in river channels, well, nothing really ever stays upstream, only upstream. The reaction to change in river systems, and especially mountain systems that are so dynamic, is never limited to the place that the change occurred. And it also might be delayed in time, so we had lots of effects, but very much later on, and sometimes we don't even connect them, but we have to live with them. On the right, just some of the examples, the incision that was one of the major adjustments to human intervention and environmental change in the last 50 years. First infrastructure, and well, maybe you cannot see on the left side, but on the right side, sorry. Left side is for you. Technology. Right, so here you have a river channel that is like a gully, tremendously in size, but there's infrastructure, that's lines that were exposed, just missing. So I would not focus on that in detail, but as an effect of those interventions that we planned to help the people and to curb, to constrain the river somehow, we kind of managed to zombify them. Try to make them static, but what happens mostly as a result of channelization and sediment mining, because we use a lot of gravel for rivers, we thought it was a resource, and there will always be more coming down from the higher areas. We have lots of geomorphic dynamic equilibrium and this rapid strength that is a couple of meters in 50, 60 years. That's a tremendous rate. We have lots of water storage and flood water storage. So we try to get the water as far up fast as we can out of the mountains. And in some places it worked, but the problem is the water has to spill somewhere, and it does. So we actually have higher peak discharges in floodways in downstream regions. And we have lots of longitudinal and lateral connectivity that we can think about, total simplification of a channel structure, and loss of habitats. So this is a little bit counterintuitive, but we actually have the opposite of what we desired. So we have increased flood hazard downstream, we have more instability, more dense infrastructure, and recently we started looking at that, decreased biodiversity, and also, well, recreation potential. That's just one of the examples. Maybe it's not very visible here, but on the lowest picture, you can see the constraints, well, never in a straitjacket, basically. And I would like to use just this picture and come back to it. So we kind of changed on purpose and not our rivers beyond recognition. And we somehow no longer know what is natural and how we should react to it, what is not. The picture you're looking at, I don't know how you feel about it. A lot of people feel horribly, just like this is awful. But this is one of the most pristine beaches that we have, one of the few left, and they are really, really tiny. So there are ways to try and manage. Poland is a country that doesn't really know if it's in the west or in the east, but now we're in the European Union and we have to follow certain legal regulations. So we do have Water Framework Directive that does really help with enforcing, I'll just use that word, enforcing certain ideas. So as you probably know, we have to protect, enhance and restore river reaches, and we also have to prevent further damage. On the right side, the more red it is, the darker red, the worse the state is, and even if we assess the water body study on chemical and ecological measures, it doesn't look so well. We're still postponing the day where we should achieve this. This is going slowly. And so when we think about how we want to restore rivers, then say, well, it's easier said than done, because from a scientific perspective, it is very, very easy, but also it showed how big a rift between, let's say, normal people, a population is, and scientists, how differently we see rivers, and how many challenges we have to overcome, to find a common language, and convince people that we have to look at management, especially the mountain rivers, very, very differently. So now a little bit of an experiment. I would like you to honestly, inside, look at those pictures and think about the first thing that comes into your mind. So about 3 weeks ago, we had a massive flood in southwestern Poland, in a mountain area on the border of the Czech Republic. Rivers don't care about borders. And we had a forecast of 300 millimeters of rain in 3 days. We had, well, nobody believed it. That's half of our yearly annual precipitation. We got that in 1 day, and we had tremendous damage. And now when you look at this, there's a lot of damage, definitely. That was a terrible flood. But depending who you are, I honestly must say my first look, when I look at the pictures, oh, there's wood, because I worked on wood and rivers, it's like, okay, there must be wood transport delivery. And okay, that's no normal process, it was going to happen, I believed it in the forecast. But if you're a social geographer, you could probably think about people there, or if you're a local decision maker, you would be thinking about how to repair this and how to find money. And if you live there, that's just damage, destruction, loss of property. If you're a military or a firefighter or first responder, you probably look at this even differently. Soil scientists will see just a lot of soil degradation, not mud, and see very, very different problems. I'm pretty sure even in this room, we would have completely different ideas of what has happened here. So is this an intrusion of nature into our land, or is this natural process that's just pulsating? The environment is changing and we have extreme events, but it's our fault that we have a city there. I'm exaggerating, but I think you get my point. So in the world of science, we have metrics. We can use them to say, okay, this is right, this is good, we should go this way. We can evaluate rivers in many different ways. But in the real world, we want to tell mountain people that this is okay, and like you have your road in the wrong place, move away. I would like to just to stress how fundamentally different our perspectives are, and we, in everyday research, we don't really think about it. We did, or we think, oh, people are incompetent. And we have plenty of different ideas why this flood happens, and of course, perspectives are different. Some of the journalists and even politicians blame beavers, which is ridiculous, but this happens, and people think about it. So we need to change our perspective as scientists, also in a different way. This is just a picture from a paper by Grant and others. How dams was. This you see just this human intervention is just in one place. But what we need to start thinking about is that humans change every aspect of the basin and the channels, also in the mountains. And people also are part of that system. So we are everywhere and we change everything. So that system is very dynamic, very independent, in very, very complex way. And well, our old ideas, apparently, and it happened a couple of times, this is one of the failed dams in Poland, there was more than one. We also have a very, very clear message that our conception of how we should have flood control, how it should work, it just doesn't work as well as we expected. It just doesn't. And dams and embankments are erodible. If we build more, we just spend money, it's not going to happen. So we have a plethora of opinions. Everybody talks, everybody's dam specialist now, of course, and we have lots of emerging conflicts that maybe, but also this flooding And those instances of spectacular failures of dams is also a very short window to maybe reevaluate how our thinking about rivers should be. So our perceptions drive what we, what we see happening, and see unique ecosystems, or even if they're resources, like why we need that wood or gravel in the river, we should use it, or just some change it to for recreation. We also, as scientists, already in our heads that the river floods and the space it takes is much longer, and this is the potential conflict zone. But there's this very literal perception of rivers drives all the decisions. So the settlement, the infrastructure, the management, and the sense of safety. We had a lot of discussion of the flood hazard maps. We have them where people and politicians and local developers, they contradict it because it's a land that most of the time is available for use. So for us, the rivers are dynamic, but for people, and we see a range of behaviors of rivers. Sometimes it seems static, but sometimes it will flood. For us, this is normal. Probably for the rest of the society, this is an instability that has to be constrained. And something, I don't know if it happens in Turkey, it happens in Poland. We have had many millennium floods and 100 years floods. So if there are any hydrologists in the room, I think you probably know what I mean. It's a very poetic way and an emphatic way to talk about very big flood. But it's also very bad for people to understand that this is not really, that there's nothing about the possibility of a flood of this dimension coming there next year. But we have different expectations and different social demand, and perception of what is good and beautiful also differs. So we need a new mindset, definitely, because our conventional solutions increasingly fail, but those new conflicts, they also offer us a way to work on viable solutions, but realistic solutions. We have different values that we attribute to rivers, and maybe not all ecosystems services that are provided by mountain rivers are actually understood by people. There's traditional knowledge, ecological knowledge, but the question is it still up to date? Is it still with how work becomes modern? Do people in those small communities, do they really care anymore? Is this knowledge so valid? There's a lot of emphasis on that, and we have different stakeholders, so people might have different needs and different ideas how to use and manage rivers, and they don't always have to be informed. They don't have our superpowers of geography. And this is quote from Friars and Bradley, that fragmented knowledge leads to fragmented management, unfortunately. So now I would like to use a different example from our yard about how those conflicts can look in reality. So I'm sure you might have you have heard about plastic in mountain rivers. Maybe you have seen it. We have plenty, unfortunately. Should not be talking about my country this way, but unfortunately we have a lot of plastic. So there are different categories, the nano, the micro, but the microplastic usually is related to rubbish. So it's different form and size. It's usually fresh to fauna and they can get trapped. Birds on the animals, so they ingest, they can eat it. So we have decreased in aesthetic value of plastic there. We don't know enough about the biochemical degradation of plastic in rivers, about the fragmentation, a little bit we do know, how much of it is already in sediment and is reacting there. But what we do know, we have mineral organic, but we also have a new artificial synthetic sediment in fluvial system and also in the mountains. So especially when you think about the delivery of microplastic and its fate in the mountains, that's a very serious issue. There's some work done by our team and colleagues from Academy of Sciences. So mountain rivers, because of their dynamic nature, are also probably the fragmentation machines, as we like to call it. So the very unfortunate example of the smaller plastic that might happen to be in rivers might be produced in the rivers by natural processes and plastic that we go through. So just for a little context, this is where we work. That's the forelands of the Tücaum Mountains. We have 5 dynamic rivers that carry a lot of gravel sediment. So, but we still have some complex and multi-thread ridges there. The one you saw in the picture is the green one, which have extensive forest, riparian forest and wooded islands. They are quite unmanaged, nobody wants to be there, so it's good. But they are unique hotspots of biodiversity, of reference value. But they also trap a lot of wood and sediment. Now, as scientists, we do know that wood in rivers, that something that was called dead wood, or we call it large wood right now, is very important for diversity, for morphological diversity, for biodiversity as well. But it also, switch this slide. So it also captures a lot of microplastic in the river if it is in that river. Okay. So when we look at the fate of plastic in the rivers, there's on very different levels, there are very different factors, natural factors of what's happening, but there are multiple anthropogenic factors from urbanization, waste management, population density, to how the land is used, the dams, and to the bridges, proximity of roads, interestingly, and bad reinforcements. So how does it get there? Very quickly, when people throw it in. Because, it's like a digestive system as well. If you throw something into Mountain River, it has slope, it has discharge, it will be taken away. Unfortunately, a lot of people do it. And they are redistributed, plastic in the rubbish is distributed with natural processes, by animals as well, especially water floods. And riparian areas, so the forest close to the river is often the microplastics thing. Recharged with new material that's brought by the river. And we think we already have that sediments, this new synthetic sediments, floodplain sediments. So, I'm sorry, I'm a bit embarrassed with the scientific truth. People do it, and even though they have to pay for removal. So that's how plastic gets there. I'll get back to the mountain rivers at the end. So we have those very valuable, they might not be pretty, but very valuable wood accumulations, and they trap tremendous amounts of plastic. So they kind of filter them out. And unfortunately, this happens the most where we have most wood in those highly valuable wider sections that trap sediment and prevent excessive flooding downstream, but they also microplastic traps. And I will not go into details, but the amounts compared when we calculated, well, you go in the field and you measure it, and you get out and you measure it, so that's how I got the data actually. There's a lot more in those very, very valuable sections. And now if we would like to do something about it and clean it and think how people use wood in that area, we have to think what's going to happen to those wood chips, because lots of people do use them. They use it as a source of wood. So just a very brief context, wood has some special place in the Polish Carpathians, and we have, I would say, people have a sense of ownership as well of the natural resources, the rivers, the forests, the peat. They feel they can use all of it. They historically used local materials in construction and in heating. This is a cold area. And it has a very sentimental value as well. We have no regulations, specific regulations that would forbid people to remove the accumulations of wood. But people use them a lot, and they feel they have the right to do it. And the rest of don't care because it's perceived as a very anesthetic, ugly, and also dangerous. Sometimes it can be. But we do have regulations against use of wood fuel stoves and fireplaces, and we have a lot of conflict around this. So, well, mountain valleys are usually very deep. We have a lot of stagnating colder earth. They are much colder than areas around, and people need heating. And a lot of people there think that they're, especially with the increasing cost of energy, that was sort of severely exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic and war in Ukraine. The increase in, a lot of people think that they cannot afford. So what we said in Polish here, we have a catastrophic smog in the Portland area because people cannot afford coal or anything else. They use wet wood and everything that's like furniture for heating. And Poland, unfortunately, is known as a champion, as a place that is notorious for smog, and this is very, very typical of mountain valleys and basins, the stagnating air that the smoke just stays there. So, on one side, we have shifts in the policy related to sustainable energy and regulations that actually force out using the conventional fuel sources. So these are increasing costs or direct ban. So people turn to waste and traditionally use wood, and sometimes it is sourced in rivers for heating purposes. So even if they think they cannot afford it, or they cannot afford it really, people oppose those new technologies, or they say, no, I will not use the new thing they tell me to use, for whatever reasons. So we do think that they will start using more wood from the rivers, because you can't sort of, with the floods, it's available and it's free. But this is where we come back to plastic. There's tons of plastic and waste in that wood jars. And now if we think about pollution, there's a lot of stress on plastic, you must have heard it. So for a local manager or decision maker, the easiest way to deal with this is to remove the wood. Just go into the river and remove the whole thing. The plastic is so stuck in the wood jars, it's impossible to pick it by hand, unless you're a scientist and you want to. It's impossible. So at the same time, if we want to address plastic pollution in rivers, we have to think about the local people, their energy needs, and the role of wood that traps the plastic within that system. So we have also, we have very negative perceptions of wood. We have negative perceptions of beavers that are there as well. But we have a lot of challenges removing plastic from rivers and accumulation. Some people do it by hand, and they'll come back to this fantastic project in the Danube region, or Danube Basin. But at the same time, it's a possible problem and very unfortunate opportunity to clean rivers. So if it's not informed, it's not done wisely, it will, in good faith, will do more damage than help. And just a digression, I borrowed it from the IDEA project if you're interested in plastics and rivers. It's a tremendous initiative that's also working with policymakers on how to manage this big integrated project. I'm not sure, but very interesting, and also grassroots initiatives and people who did come and clean those plastic bottles. What is important about this project, and what I was thinking about to mention here, is to look at the whole system. And this project is so effective because it was realistic and it looked at how waste gets there, why people do it. So very, very multi-level analysis and tackling actual realistic problems. So to make this a little bit more optimistic, there are also how scientists could manage. There are some examples of I can show you. So this is an example from the same river in different place. There's a little bit on the right side. You can see a road. It's a local road. It's nothing. You could barely see it in the pool. For local farmers, it's of very big value. It's very important to them, and they need it. But the river, because of its dynamic behavior, was threatening the river, and we knew that it's going to erode very quickly during another event, and will just destroy the river and the land. So there was an idea by the local water authorities to channelize. That's how we did it in the past. So just basically make one canal, but this is expensive, and other opinions were asked, actually. So the idea we came up with, this is also a very valuable river section, the preference conditions. So what we did do, we suggested that we can use those existing channels with little water and just unclog them from sediment, use natural deflectors, and try to get the water to flow in a different place. And it worked. And it was 4 times cheaper. So this was our leverage to convince local authorities and also local people that this could work. We later found out that the other solution, technical solution, would not work because the river shifted so much during the next flood. So we saved it, and not to go into details. So we tried to move the flow from the most right channel into the left one, and actually, it happened. The deflectors worked. So a good idea. Another option to discuss, and maybe you've heard about it, and we are trying to apply it, although it takes a lot of discussion, is the erodible river corridors, or affording more space for the rivers. Our rivers was very much damaged, and a lot of damage to infrastructure is because, well, frankly, the infrastructure should not be there. So that's an internationally known concept that we did try. So what you do, you allow the river to use more wider space. So the bank reinforcement will not be in this place, but we try to move it away. And not to go into details, we did have some modeling after this was introduced in certain river sections. It's not everywhere, obviously. I mean, it really worked tremendously well, also for the flood damage. So, well, we need to look at mountain rivers as socio-ecological systems with people there, and people who make decisions who see rivers one way or the other. I chose these pictures to show you that we used it about 20 years ago now in a perception study in 10 different countries. It was perception of wood, but most students said, there were about 1,000 of them, that there's no channel and this is horrible. This is unsafe and this is ugly. And it should be managed. And for scientists, this is the best we have, and it's the most natural. So just to, in your own heads, you can think if you like this kind of landscape, river landscape or not. But well, the division is here. So I was also asked to address students if you are here. Well, look at the entire system. You work with rivers, but you will need support and you will need communication. We don't speak the same language. We don't speak the same language even people who work across the hall sometimes. So, but geographers are uniquely equipped to look at the geographical environment and to look at those system interactions holistically. Even if we want to look at our narrow space and our patch of research, just go out to use those synergies. So use these interdisciplinary approaches. They will bring you not only joy, but new knowledge. Trust me, you can listen about decaying leaves for 2 hours in fascination. I would not have thought it was possible. And also explore transdisciplinary approaches, the ones when you work with people in the sense that you work with local managers, local decision makers, with local water authorities or with different levels. And also don't underestimate the need to speak the same language. So reach out, because people might not reach out to you. And I think also it's important, Polish is not easy to learn. I think Turkish is not either, I'm joking. But we, in academic reality, we generally start publishing in English very quickly, and we stop publishing anything in our local language, at least in Poland. That's the reality of academia and how we are evaluated. But I think it's extremely important to have translations and to publish our research so that people can, who actually deal every day with those sources, can use it. Fragmented knowledge can only engender fragmented management. So I would invite you to look at the paper on migrated geomorphologists from Australia on how to manage rivers in a modern way. It's a good thing. And it looks at also a more holistic approach. And so let's step out of our happy bubble. And I said otherwise the knowledge does not accumulate. And about 10 years ago, I participated in a big project and we published a book on flood risk in the upper Vistula Basin. So this is where we work. A lot of answers are there. I swear nobody read it. We had a lot of good ideas. They're out now. Maybe they will be used. But our book went nowhere because we didn't go anywhere with it. Sorry to say that. Well, thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Is there any question? But we only accept only 2 questions to follow the schedule on time. Is there any question? Sorusu olan var mı? Sadece 2 soru kabul edebileceğiz. Programı takip edilmek adına. Doçent Doktor Can Hocam Eskeç sunumları için teşekkür ediyoruz. Şimdi hediyelerini vermek üzere Coğrafya Bölüm Başkanımız Uğur Doğan'la ve Tücaum Ödülü Sayın Profesör Doktor Necla Türkoğlu'nu sahneye davet ediyorum. So thank you very much for your presentation. Sırada Magandaluço Üniversitesi'nden sınır oluşturma olarak sessizlik, sınırlar ve nesil ötesinde bakım ve bakım eylemleri sunumuyla son davetli konuşmacımız Sayın Doktor Öğretim Üyesi Dora Sampaio yer almaktadır. Kendisi sempozyumumuza çevrimici olarak katılacak. Now is the last keynote speaker, Dr. Dora Sampaio from Utrecht University from the Netherlands, with her presentation Silence as Boundary Making, Acts of Care and Caring Across Borders and Generation. Hi dear Dr. Sampaio, welcome to Tücaum 2024 International Geography Symposium, to the keynote session. So if you are ready, you can start your presentation. Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Thank you. I think I can, if I can hear you correctly, I can start.
Yeah, you can start. You can start.
All right, thank you so very much. Thank you for the kind invitation. It's really a pleasure to be with you. I wish I could be with you in person, but unfortunately that was not possible. So I'm joining online, and I want to start by thanking, of course, Tücaum and the scientific committee for the invitation. So let me perhaps try to share my presentation, and I hope you can see it. Can you see my presentation?
Yeah, we can see.
Perfect. All right. So then, let me start by telling you a little bit about what I'm presenting today for you. So what I'll be presenting draws on a larger project that I started in 2018, which focus on transnational families and inequalities of care under regimes. And this is a project funded by the Max Planck Institute, so the Aging in a Time of Mobility research group within Max Planck. And indeed, what I was very interested in doing is looking at how family members care for each other in the face of very prolonged physical absences. So, for example, when family members had an undocumented status abroad. So that was a project, and my word for this project, and I think this will be interesting for you because it's a very different geographical context, but one that I think also will link well with other discussions in Turkish geography. So for this project, I conducted field work in Brazil and in the United States. So I was working here at distance. I had noticed it before in different interviews that not everything was said and a lot of information was suppressed for the good of the family. So issues relating to the legal certainty, the work precarity, very difficult working conditions, housing struggles, so very difficult housing conditions, also health problems that were concealed through silences and also through discursive strategies that people use different ways to not talk about difficult topics. So when I started reflecting back on all these interviews and all the material that I was collecting, I was also realizing that these conversational strategies were ways of establishing boundaries, so were forms of boundary making. So in other words, they were used as these invisible boundaries that were intersubjectively produced in order to protect both sides of these transnational relationships between Brazil and the United States. And both older parents in Brazil and their offspring abroad, what they did was that they curated their lives, so they concealed certain experiences, lived experiences, as ways of caring for each other. And such practices, they speak much wider and louder than transnational families, of course. So how many of us in the room, online, have in the past made use of silences in our daily interactions as a way, for example, of demarcating spaces? So in this presentation, what I will do is I'll talk about silence as boundary making and how this links to care across generations and across borders as well. So to give you some context, acts of care and caring and generations are achieved through tacit agreements and or social contracts of silence. And here I'm citing Jane Winter's work on which topics are considered safe to talk about and which ones aren't to be avoided. And these tacit agreements reveal the fundamental tensions between what is knowledge and what is acknowledged in our everyday lives. And as Eviatar Sorumavel, and we can see here the book, The Elephant in the Room, Silence and Denial in Everyday Life, Silences are often used because what is not said doesn't really have to be dealt with. So silences and concealments can be seen as socio-spatial relational practices. And what I mean by socio-spatial relational practices is everyday acts of delimiting certain social and certain physical spaces in our interactions with others. And of course, this can result from different things, from fears, feelings of fear, shame, denial, pain, or also embarrassment in relation to, as I mentioned, legal challenges, housing precarity at work as well. Silence is noted by linguistics and those that student human communication as part of our communicative system, equaling speech. Silence is about unspoken conversation, but it's also about conversational strategies that are used to avoid talking about certain topics. So Meral Shohek's book, which you also see here in the slide, Silence and Sacrifice, Family Stories of Care and the Limits of Love in Vietnam, shows also how silences appear as a way of disciplining the body not to speak, not to express, not to vocalize, and the challenges, of course, that also come with that. What is not being said, why, and what are the implications of this for our studies, to our research. It is indeed much easier to analyze what is said than what is not said, and how we can reflect on those discursive strategies. But as many before me, how many authors have emphasized, silences are an integral part of our expression, and that makes them as significant as spoken words. And in that way, researchers must acknowledge that silence as well as spoken words, to look for these implicit meanings and responses, not only in the words that are said during our interviews, but also body language, bodily reactions, and take that into account as well. And here, that's where we hit a big challenge, because at the time of evidence-based research, we as qualitative researchers, we are expected to demonstrate the strength and the validity of our findings based on what our research participants say. So then, from this perspective, of course, what is silenced is considered a problem because there are no words that we can analyze. But so contrary to this, what I'm arguing is that silence has yet to be fully appreciated in qualitative and also in geographical research, despite much recognition of its significance. So as geographers, we still have to fully acknowledge the role of silences in demarcating spaces and producing boundaries in everyday life. Silence and the symbolic boundaries it creates are fundamentally contingent on space, on social norms, and individuals' own lived experiences as well. And my talk today builds also on some of my previous work, thinking about how silence and conversational strategies are enacted as care practices. And here in this slide, you also see a very nice visual representation. This is part of the project, part of the group, research group, in which we visualize with the help of illustrator, Alco Martinez, we visualize the findings from the research. And you can see here also the website where you can find all the illustrations, which is a very, which was a very interesting experience of helping visualizing and making the findings from our project also available to those that participated in the research and make it just much wider. So now let me turn to the types of boundary making. So this will be the core of my talk today. And looking at silence as boundary making, so acts of care and caring across borders and across generations. And what I suggest here is that silences act as boundary-making practices in family life, and namely in context of physical, prolonged physical separation. So silences appeared in the interviews with the transnational families that I was speaking with as a modality of communication and also a relational practice that took shape through different types of conversational strategies. And I build here on a social geography perspective. For example, the work of Melanie Zurba to conceptualize silence as a boundary-making practice. Boundaries that can be conceived in many different ways. We see how boundaries in geography, they can be conceptualized as invisible lines, as lines in maps, but also as buffer areas or areas of transition between what is verbalized and what is silenced. Boundary making through communication is of course very dynamic. It's intersubjective because it is created between people. And it can also be very contested process. And so the four typology, the four types that I have here and that I will discuss, each of these in turn, is boundary making by concealment, boundary making by selection of means of communication, boundary making by avoidance, and then the final one is boundary making by diversion. So let me then give you a sense of what I mean by this in each of the slides. So here I include in each slide some of the quotes from my research. I won't read each of the quotes, but I leave them here so you can also go through them as I speak about each of these cases. So with boundary making by concealment, practice linked to disguising information and hiding difficult truths. And this can be done, for example, by giving very short answers on very difficult or contested issues. So I introduce here to you Fabrizio. So one of my research participants is a man in his 50s, early 50s, and I interviewed him in the United States. So he was in the United States, and then Dona Francisca is a woman in her late 70s, and I interviewed her in her home in Brazil. And what their stories have in common is that they both are experiencing tribulations about what they are considering geographically distant, in geographically distant exchanges. So Fabrizio, to give you a sense of his story, he had been undocumented in Brazil for 18 years. So the periods in which people might be undocumented were prolonged, were very long. So in his case, it was almost 2 decades that he was living in the United States, undocumented, and he could not travel well. If he traveled back to Brazil, he would not be able to leave. So he had not visited or been in Brazil for almost 2 decades. And he had entered the United States through the border with Mexico, so that had made it very difficult to regularize the situation since then. He was working with a lawyer to get his situation regularized, but it was still something that was not done. And as his words here that you can see show, silence in this case was really morally fraught. So it carried a lot of tension, anxiety, and also conflicting moral dilemmas about what to share, sharing the truth or masking the truth. And in his experience, as with other participants, silence comes here very closely connected with sacrifices as well. And it entails a lot of hardship and ordinary challenges that create disorder to the expected order of things for the sake of the family and also for oneself. And then Dona Francisca, you see here, what she's concealing about, or what she's not telling, is about her health issues. So she is now in her 70s, she's facing, of course, some health issues, but she doesn't want, and you can see here, she doesn't want her husband to tell about these challenges to her children in the United States because they are far away. And in her opinion, there's nothing they can do for her. So she is complaining here and she's saying, well, my husband is always telling them about my health problems, but I don't want to worry them because they already have enough worries in their lives. And this is indeed, these stories, they show the tensions between what is personally experienced, but also what is acknowledged in family exchanges. They show really a reluctance to openly talk about topics that can be hurtful and carry feelings of fear about facing difficult, uncomfortable truths. So boundary making through denying talking about certain topics is a way to avoid pain, but it's also a way to preserve relationships. And in other ways, it's also a way to conceal, or it can be a symptom of loneliness, a form of quiet resilience as well. So now I turn to the second type of boundary making. So boundary making by selecting means of communication. So here I will introduce you to one story that captures many others, and these are the words of Marcelo that I spoke about at the beginning, and he had been also abroad undocumented for about 15 years. And that meant, again, that he had not been to Brazil during that period, and that he could only speak on the phone with his family. And he had experienced quite difficult moments abroad, the death of his mother, and he could not have visited. But also he saw the health of his father declining over time. And he was considering whether he would, for example, re-emigrate or return to Brazil. And he explained that speaking with his father on the phone had become very difficult. And that was for a variety of reasons. It was because he could really see that his father was, was having trouble hearing, and his health was declining. And for him, that was very difficult also to face. So what he did instead is that he used WhatsApp family groups, and he would speak with his siblings instead to catch up on what was happening in Brazil and on the health of his father as well. So boundary making through the selection of means of communication is about generating these buffer areas. So for example, communicating with siblings in order to protect relationships. It's about really protecting family members. It is also about, in a way, self-protection as well. And now I turn to the third type of boundary making, which is boundary making by avoidance. And here it consists of eluding specific topics in conversations, particularly those that can be a source of disagreement, of conflict, of tension. And Milena here, a woman in her late 40s, she had been living in the United States for a very long time. Was one of my research participants that had been living abroad the longest since the 1990s. And she was already a US citizen, so she did not have the same legal challenges. She did not face the same legal challenges. But during her early periods in the United States, she had faced a lot of trouble. She was, of course, lonely. She had trouble learning the language, and she told me that she had shared a lot, and in fact, she said overshared with her mother, who was in Brazil. And as a result, her mother became, of course, very concerned, and she was insisting that she would return to Brazil. Despite the challenges that she faced, and that created a lot of friction with her mother, Milena decided to stay, and despite their differing perspectives, she decided to stay in the US. And of course, that created tension on their different perspectives, which were of course made of different truths, not always compatible or not always also aligned. And so over time, Milena learned to actively avoid difficult conversations. For example, having stayed abroad, despite all the challenges. And this was a way of mediating her relationship with her mother. And she believed that some things were better unsaid, so not to mention. And that silencing some thoughts, some emotions, would prevent conflict. So breaking the boundaries of silence can indeed mean breaking the social fabric of a relationship. And thus keeping the silence and pardoning off conversations can be used also as a way of keeping the family intact. What we also see here is that silence as boundary making is very gendered, is a very gendered process, which filled with gendered forms of moral socialization. For example, women experience further pressure to talk about and to vocalize their thoughts, emotions, as Milet's case here exemplifies. And it was oversharing with her mother that indeed led them later to a process of censorship and disciplining what words she would voice. So her ordinary silences sought to temp out potential sources of conflict and maintain that harmonious relationship across space and across generations. But of course, silence as boundary making can also trigger isolation, and silencing also weakens our sense of sociability and our sense of intersubjectivity as well. And then the fourth and the final type of boundary making that I talked to you about today is boundary making by diversion. And here I refer to when individuals focus on safe and easy or ordinary topics to avoid difficult ones. So the conversational strategy here is exemplified by Augusto, a man in his 50s living in the United States, and then his parents in their mid-80s living in Brazil. And their experiences show how distant relationships are sustained through focusing on safe or easy topics. And by easy and safe topics, I mean, for example, here you can see how they talk about gossip and everyday affairs. So talking about very light topics is a way to avoid dealing with very difficult conversations such as legal tribulations, challenges in the household and work. So these are or can be understood as distraction tactics and tacit understandings that delimit and establish invisible boundaries on what topics to engage with and what difficult topics to avoid. And you see here also Dona Alicine and Senhor José, like Dona Francisca before, they reflect on the fact that they cannot share everything. And here especially talking about health issues, and that they don't want to share, in fact, what might be really happening, because they believe that their children abroad are already dealing with a lot, so they don't want to share more of that, of those challenges. So they try to control negative feelings to avoid disturbing that cognitive tranquility and that collective harmony, and try to foster those relationships of togetherness. They apply discursive actions of redirection and reframing to avoid addressing very sensitive issues. So, to conclude, the boundary making processes, the boundary making practices through silences and conversational strategies that I discussed here with you today, they flesh out through these very dynamic, intersubjective, and often also very delicate experiences that bind families together despite physical distance and across generations. So this generational aspect here is very important. My interviewee silences are, of course, entangled in global inequalities and broader legal structures of dispossession and oppression that make physical presence and proximate care often an impossibility. And these experiences, they involve forced physical distance, they involve prolonged absences, and also a very important generational component. So I discussed 4 types of boundary making, and these are, of course, not mutually exclusive. They overlap in some ways, and they feed into each other, of course. And the social patterns captured here, they really show this dynamism and the intersubjectivity that is inherent to boundary making, and the boundary work that is connected to what is known, but also what is acknowledged in relationships. So silence as boundary making is produced act through individual and collective efforts to discipline one's vocalizations. And while such practices can protect relationships and maintain that harmony and solidarity and avoid pain, it can also trigger friction and ruptures. So put in different ways, violence as boundary making can result in forms of social and moral corrosion as well. And that is an important danger. Silence as boundary making is also about acceptance, accepting that current circumstances might not be easily changeable, and that they need to be lived through and they need to be waited on. So there's an important element of time here as well. The stories I shared with you today, they of course, they show how micro and macro dynamics from individual experiences, but also family dynamics, the financial struggles, the transnational legal and institutional structures, how they produce different forms of boundary making through silence. Each of these scales, each of these experiences and interactions, even the smallest ones, they are of course very profoundly shaped by these power relations and hierarchies as well. And I think I will leave it there. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for your attention.
So thank you so much for your presentation. So is there any questions to the presenter? So we have a question. We will provide the microphone.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and I have a question about the participants. So you specifically choose the ones over 60, the parents, and can you hear us? Is it frozen?
Can you hear us?
I think I will have to ask you to rephrase the question closer to the microphone, if that
Okay.
closer to the computer, perhaps.
Okay, I will make it as loud as possible. Is it better now?
I need to explain something. Hocam şöyle şu an
Oraya yani.
buradaki mikrofondan geliyor. Dolayısıyla biraz buraya yaklaşırsak daha iyi olur.
Is it better now?
I can hear better now. If you could just repeat, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. I would like to ask a question about the participants. You specifically choose the participants over 60 years old. Is there a special reason for it? And if I missed it, I would like to understand better the participants from United States. They are the family members, or they are randomly chosen. Are these people related in within the family?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think now I understand it. So the project looked at intergenerational care. So I wanted to speak with parents that are considered aging. So the category is often 60 and over. Of course, we know this very much depends on the context, but that's why then I was talking with parents that were aged 60 and above. So from 60 to, I spoke with my oldest participant was over 80. And then with the adult children abroad, they would be between the late 30s to their 50s. And that's why these two groups. So what I did was I tried as much as possible to interview family members, where I interviewed parents in Brazil and then their adult children in the United States. It was not always possible, of course, because people, it's very sensitive research, so not everyone would be comfortable to share the context of their adult children abroad, especially when they were undocumented. So I did as much as possible dyads, so parents and the adult children. And when it was impossible, I just interviewed adult children in the United States and older parents in Brazil, but they were not part of the same family.
And would you agree with the idea that the attitude of the parents towards their children, if they are family members in the United States, if their attitudes are universal? Because when their kids are in difficulty, I think it's not only the physical distance between the family members, it's about being parents. This is what I think they were so careful. And sometimes, as you documented here, they were in silence. And those who were in hardship in the United States, the younger generations, of course, sometimes they might not prefer to speak about the realities that they experience because of the distance and their impossibility to travel back. This is what I understand. The variable here is this physical distance. But would you agree with the idea that also personality, perhaps they just don't want to speak sometimes, maybe it's also a characteristic. Do you think the only reason is the physical distance and the impossibility to reach each other? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think you make a good point, and I agree with you that it's not only the physical distance. I think the physical distance enhances that process, makes it more significant because the prolonged physical distance, you know that in some cases you cannot travel, and then you want to not talk about things because in practice it's difficult for the adult children to be present in Brazil, and you're not going to talk about things issues because on the one hand, the parents in Brazil, the children might not be able to be there physically, and on the other hand, for those in the United States facing legal issues, they face the fear of deportation every day. Telling that to their parents in Brazil, it doesn't help. It doesn't help them, and also doesn't help their parents because it just adds worry. But I agree with you that this is a context that is important to look at where silence is really at play, but it's not the only one. And it is really something that happens in our everyday lives, even without physical distance. But physical distance, I am suggesting here, amplifies that. I hope that answers.
Okay, is there any other question? So thank you very much for your presentation and contribution, and we hope one day meet face-to-face conferences. So we are really appreciate for your contribution. So we will send the certificate of attendance later on email. So thank you very much on behalf of the head of Tücaum. So thank you. Sayın Doktor Öğretim Üyesi Dora Samparya'ya sunumları için teşekkür ediyoruz. Kıymetli konuklar, dear Dr. Samparya, you can leave from the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much and have a great conference.
Thank you. Kıymetli konuklar, açılış törenimiz burada sona eriyor. Oturumda salonlarda başlayacaktır. Öğle yemeği saat 13.00'da bu binada 1. kat öğretim elemanları lokalinde olacaktır. Öğle yemekleri için yakın kartlarınızı